Millionaire threw a lavish party just to humiliate his ex. But when she walked in with 5-year-old triplet sons and a powerful new CEO husband, the room froze in disbelief. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel, and let's get started. Sarah Mitchell nervously twisted the engagement ring on her finger as the private elevator climbed smoothly toward the penthouse of Trump Tower. At 27, the Bronx Community High School literature teacher felt acutely out of place in this world of marble floors and gilded mirrors. The pregnancy test in her synthetic leather purse felt like it weighed a ton. She caught a glimpse of her reflection in the elevator's mirrored wall. Brown hair pulled back in a simple bun, minimal makeup, wearing the department store dress she had purchased specifically for tonight. 6 months ago, she would never have imagined herself here, engaged to Alex Whitman, heir to the Whitman Enterprises real estate empire. They had met during a field trip she'd organized for her students to one of the Whitman cultural developments. A chance encounter in an elevator, a coffee, dinner, and now this. The elevator doors slid open silently. Sarah stepped into the foyer of the 4,000-square-foot penthouse with its panoramic view of Central Park. "Alex?" she called, her voice sounding smaller than she intended. "We need to talk." He was on the terrace, drinking whiskey with 2 executives in tailored suits. His perfectly styled brown hair and custom Armani suit created a stark contrast to her modest dress. When he turned, his smile faltered for just a moment. "Darling, I'm in a meeting," he said, his tone impatient. The 2 men exchanged glances. "It's important," Sarah insisted, summoning her courage. The courage she used daily in her classroom with troubled teens seemed to abandon her here, in this rarefied air 42 floors above Manhattan. Alex sighed audibly, excusing himself from his companions. "This better be quick. I have the Henderson deal to close tonight." When they were finally alone in his study, a room larger than her entire Bronx apartment, Sarah took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was deafening. Alex set his crystal tumbler down on his mahogany desk, his face transforming into a mask of coldness she had never seen before. "Are you sure it's mine?" The question cut like a knife. Sarah stepped back as if physically struck. "How can you ask that?" "Of course it's yours!" Alex laughed, a hollow sound that echoed through the apartment. "You really think someone like me would be tied down to someone as insignificant as you? What are you saying?" Sarah's voice trembled as the ground seemed to shift beneath her feet. "I'm saying this was fun while it lasted. You were an interesting charity project. The dedicated teacher from the Bronx, so committed to her troubled students." He gestured dismissively. "Perfect for my public image. But a child? With you? My family would never accept common blood diluting our lineage." "Common blood?" Sarah felt her legs weaken. "I'm the person you asked to marry 2 weeks ago." "A miscalculation. You were a temporary distraction, Sarah, but I need someone who can navigate my Upper East Side world, not a teacher with no future." Alex reached for her hand and yanked the engagement ring from her finger. "Frankly, did you really think you could fit into my world? You don't even know the difference between champagne and Prosecco." With a casual motion, he tossed the ring out the open window, 42 floors above the streets of Manhattan. "Alex!" Sarah cried, rushing to the window in disbelief, watching the small diamond sparkle briefly in the fading light before disappearing. "Security will escort you out. Don't come back here." He picked up his phone. "And don't worry about the baby. My lawyer will contact you. I'm willing to pay for the problem to disappear." The next minutes were a blur. Sarah found herself escorted by 2 stone-faced security guards through the lobby, tears streaming freely down her face as New York drowned in a merciless downpour. No umbrella, no proper coat, with only $200 in her bank account and a newly discovered pregnancy. The rain soaked through her thin dress as she stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the imposing skyscraper where, minutes ago, her future had seemed secure. "You'll regret this until the last day of your life, Alex," she promised the towering building, before disappearing into the anonymous Manhattan crowd. The following weeks were a nightmare. Sarah lost one of her 3 jobs when morning sickness made it impossible to tutor the son of a wealthy Upper East Side family. Without that income, she couldn't make rent on her small Bronx apartment. "I'm sorry, Ms. Mitchell," her landlord said, not looking sorry at all as he taped the eviction notice to her door. Business is business. Her neighbors watched with a mixture of pity and curiosity as she packed her meager belongings into cardboard boxes. A fellow teacher, Melissa, offered her couch temporarily. "Just until you figure things out," Melissa said kindly, helping Sarah carry a suitcase up 3 flights of stairs to her cramped apartment. Sarah's morning sickness grew worse. The exhaustion of pregnancy combined with the stress of her situation left her depleted. When she fainted during a class, the school nurse insisted she go to the hospital. "I can't afford it," Sarah protested weakly. "You can't afford not to," the nurse countered, calling an ambulance despite Sarah's objections. The Metropolitan Hospital emergency room was crowded and chaotic. Sarah waited for hours, clutching her purse to her chest, calculating how many tutoring sessions it would take to pay for this unexpected visit. Finally, a harried doctor ordered an ultrasound. "Let's check on that baby," he said, squirting cold gel on Sarah's still flat stomach. The technician moved the wand slowly across her abdomen, then paused, frowning slightly. "Is something wrong?" Sarah asked, fear gripping her heart. The technician called the doctor over, pointing at the screen. They spoke in hushed tones, and Sarah's panic grew. "Miss Mitchell," the doctor finally said, turning to her with an expression she couldn't read. "It's not just one baby. There are 3. You're carrying triplets." Sarah stared at the ultrasound in shock. 3 tiny heartbeats pulsing inside her. 3 little lives depending entirely on her. "Triplets?" she whispered, the word feeling foreign on her tongue. "Identical triplets from what we can see. It's quite rare," the doctor explained. "You'll need specialized prenatal care. This is a high-risk pregnancy." High-risk, specialized care. The words swirled in Sarah's mind alongside calculations of costs she couldn't possibly afford. That night, in the shared hospital room where they'd kept her for observation, Sarah placed her hands on her still flat stomach and made a promise to herself and the tiny beings growing within her. "No matter what happens, we're going to survive. And one day, we'll show the world who we really are." With the help of a program for single mothers, Sarah secured a subsidized apartment in Queens. The neighborhood wasn't great, but the 1-bedroom unit was clean and safe enough. She accepted work as a private tutor in the mornings, taught at school in the afternoons, and took a weekend job at a coffee shop. Every penny was saved. Every free minute was spent studying business and educational technology, a passion she'd always had but never explored. In the small hours of the night, when her pregnancy-induced insomnia kept her awake, she researched adaptive learning software, identifying gaps in the current educational systems. When her grandmother passed away, leaving only a vintage Cartier watch as inheritance, Sarah made the most difficult decision of her life. The watch was her last connection to her family, the only item of value she owned. "I'm sorry, Grandma," she whispered as she walked into the high-end pawn shop on 47th Street. "But I need to do this for them." The appraiser examined the watch carefully. $7,500, he offered. "It's a genuine 1940s tank model." Sarah nodded, fighting back tears. It was enough to register a small educational software company and buy a used computer. In her tiny apartment, with the pregnancy advancing and her belly growing impossibly large with 3 babies, Sarah worked through the nights on her project. Adaptive software that personalized learning for students with different abilities. The idea had been born from her experience with students neglected by the educational system. "They're not stupid," she would tell her colleagues. They just learn differently. The system fails them, not the other way around. The pregnancy grew more difficult in the final months. Her doctor ordered bed rest, which made working nearly impossible. Sarah coded from her bed, balanced her laptop on her enormous belly, and tutored students via video calls. When she went into labor 2 months early, she was alone in her apartment. The taxi ride to the hospital was a blur of pain and fear. "Hold on, little ones," she whispered between contractions. "We've come too far to give up now." After 14 hours of labor, Nathan, Benjamin, and Christopher were born, premature but healthy. 3 identical boys with wispy dark hair and perfect tiny fingers and toes. As they lay in the NICU incubators, Sarah stood watching them, overwhelmed by love and determination. That night, in the quiet of her hospital room, she wrote a letter and tucked it into the drawer of her bedside table. "One day I will return to Manhattan not as the broken woman who was thrown out, but as someone they cannot ignore. And you, my sons, will be living proof of the biggest mistake Alex Whitman ever made." While rain pattered against the hospital window, Sarah couldn't imagine that this terrible night would only be the beginning of a journey that would transform her from the desperate woman thrown out of a luxury tower into a conqueror who would return to Manhattan on her own terms. The rain had long since stopped, but Sarah's tears continued to fall as she cradled the letter she'd written to her sons, the promise still fresh in her mind. Morning light filtered through the thin hospital curtains, illuminating the sterile white room that had witnessed both her deepest pain and newfound resolve. 3 days after giving birth, Sarah was discharged from the hospital, but her tiny sons remained in the NICU, their translucent skin covered with monitoring wires, their futures as uncertain as hers. The nurses had been kind enough to let her stay longer than protocol allowed, recognizing a mother with nowhere else to go. "Ms. Mitchell?" A nurse with kind eyes and practical hands entered the room. "It's time for your morning check-in with the boys." Sarah nodded, carefully folding the letter and tucking it into her purse. Her body ached from the cesarean delivery, each movement a reminder of how dramatically her life had changed. The NICU was quiet except for the rhythmic beeping of monitors. Sarah approached the 3 incubators where her sons lay, each weighing just under 4 pounds. "Good morning, my fighters," she whispered, placing her hand against the clear plastic. "They're doing remarkably well," the nurse assured her, "especially considering they're triplets. Their lungs are stronger than we expected." "They get that from me," Sarah said softly, a small spark of pride cutting through her exhaustion. "We're all fighters now." 2 weeks later, Sarah stood in front of the bathroom mirror in her new subsidized apartment in Queens. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her once-fitted clothes hung loosely on her post-pregnancy frame. The toilet flushed in the background, morning sickness still plaguing her despite having already given birth, a cruel reminder of the hormonal hurricane her body was weathering. She splashed cold water on her face and checked her watch. 6:15 in the morning. Her first tutoring session started at 7:30 across town, giving her barely enough time to reach the Upper West Side apartment of the Goldstein family, whose son struggled with dyslexia. The subsidized apartment was a blessing from a social program for single mothers, but it was located in one of the rougher areas of Queens. 1 bedroom, water stains on the ceiling, and neighbors who argued loudly through paper-thin walls. Still, it was clean enough, and most importantly, it was hers. Her phone rang, the hospital calling. Sarah's heart dropped as she answered, bracing for bad news about her boys. "Ms. Mitchell, Dr. Patel here. I'm happy to inform you that Benjamin has reached the 4-pound mark. If Nathan and Christopher continue at this pace, you might be able to bring them home within 2 weeks." Home. The word hung in the air after Sarah ended the call. This sparse apartment with second-hand furniture and a crib she had assembled from parts found on the curb would be home to 4 people. She looked around, seeing not what was, but what needed to be. Paint for the water stains, curtains to brighten the room, a changing table, 2 more cribs. The buzzer rang. "Your taxi's here, ma'am," crackled the intercom. Sarah grabbed her worn leather bag filled with lesson plans and worksheets. She couldn't afford the taxi, not really, but she couldn't afford to lose this tutoring job either. Mrs. Goldstein paid $60 per hour, money that went straight into the Bringing Babies Home Fund. At the Goldsteins' lavish apartment with its marble foyer and Central Park views, Sarah felt the familiar pang of being an outsider in the world of wealth. Mrs. Goldstein, dressed in Lululemon athleisure wear despite never exercising, greeted her with a distracted wave. "Jake's in the study. He has a test on Friday. Make sure he's prepared." Sarah nodded professionally, though her stomach churned with nausea. The scent of Mrs. Goldstein's expensive perfume wasn't helping. Halfway through explaining Shakespeare to 12-year-old Jake, who was more interested in his PlayStation than Macbeth, Sarah felt the room spin. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision. "Ms. Mitchell? Are you okay?" Jake's voice sounded distant. Sarah tried to stand, to excuse herself to the bathroom, but her legs gave way. The last thing she saw was Jake's panicked expression as she crumpled to the expensive Persian rug. She awoke to Mrs. Goldstein's voice, sharp with annoyance. "She just fainted, in the middle of the lesson." Sarah blinked, finding herself on the leather couch, a worried housekeeper hovering nearby with a glass of water. "I'm so sorry," Sarah managed, attempting to sit up. "I haven't been feeling well, but I didn't want to cancel." Mrs. Goldstein cut her off with a raised hand. "I think it's best if we end our arrangement, Ms. Mitchell. We need someone reliable for Jake. I'll pay you for today, of course." The dismissal was swift and final. No inquiries about her health, no concern for her well-being, just another inconvenience in Mrs. Goldstein's curated life. Back in her apartment, Sarah counted the money in her wallet. $60 from today's cut-short session, $240 in her checking account. The rent was due in a week, $800, subsidized from the original $1,200. Then there were the hospital bills arriving daily, each one more terrifying than the last. She placed a hand on her still swollen abdomen, the cesarean scar a raised line beneath her shirt. "We'll figure this out," she promised the empty room, as if her sons could hear her from their hospital incubators. 3 days later, Sarah stood in front of her building, staring at the eviction notice taped to her door. The landlord had found a reason: late payment from the previous month when she had been in the hospital giving birth. "But I paid it," she argued, showing him the receipt on her phone. "You paid 3 days late," he said, not meeting her eyes. "The lease is clear about timeliness." "I was in the hospital having triplets." Sarah's voice rose with desperation. "Surely there's some compassion." "Business is business, Ms. Mitchell. You have 2 weeks to vacate." Her neighbors watched the exchange from their doorways, their expressions a mix of sympathy and the resigned knowledge that it could easily be them next time. Melissa, a fellow English teacher from Sarah's school, offered her couch after hearing about the eviction during lunch break. "It's not ideal," Melissa admitted, showing Sarah the convertible sofa in her living room. "But it's yours until you figure something out. My husband and kids will try to be quiet in the mornings." Sarah swallowed her pride and accepted. She had nowhere else to go, and the babies would be coming home soon. Somehow, she would need to find a new apartment, one that would accept 4 residents on her single income. The days blurred together. Teaching during the day, grading papers on Melissa's couch at night, visiting the NICU during any free moment. Sleep became a luxury she couldn't afford. When Sarah fainted during third-period English while discussing The Great Gatsby, her students' alarmed cries brought the school nurse running. "Your blood pressure is dangerously low," the nurse said after helping Sarah to the clinic cot. "When was the last time you ate a proper meal?" Sarah couldn't remember. She'd been skipping lunches to save money, subsisting on coffee and vending machine snacks. "I'm calling an ambulance," the nurse declared, reaching for the phone. "No, I can't afford another hospital bill," Sarah protested. But the nurse was adamant. "This isn't optional, Sarah. You're no good to those babies if you collapse." The Metropolitan Hospital Emergency Department was overcrowded and understaffed, as always. Sarah waited for hours on an uncomfortable gurney in the hallway, watching doctors rush past to more urgent cases. When a resident finally examined her, his diagnosis was straightforward: exhaustion, malnutrition, and anemia. Your body is trying to recover from a triplet pregnancy while you're running yourself into the ground. Sarah closed her eyes, fighting tears. I don't have a choice. My sons need me to be strong. They need you alive, he countered. You're being admitted overnight for fluids and observation. That night, alone in a shared hospital room with only a thin curtain separating her from a woman moaning in pain, Sarah faced the brutal reality of her situation. No home, barely any money, 3 premature babies dependent on her, and a body that was failing under the stress. The next morning, a hospital social worker sat at the edge of Sarah's bed, reviewing her case. Ms. Mitchell, I don't know how you've been managing on your own, she said, flipping through the file. Triplets, recent eviction, 3 jobs. You qualify for several assistance programs. Sarah listened as the woman outlined the help available: WIC for formula, food stamps, emergency housing assistance, medical coverage for the babies. I never thought I'd be here, Sarah admitted, her voice small. I have a master's degree. I'm a teacher. Life happens, the social worker said kindly, and sometimes we need help to get through it. There's no shame in that. With the social worker's assistance, Sarah was approved for a different subsidized apartment, this one through a program specifically for families with newborns. It was in a slightly better area of Queens, with 2 bedrooms instead of 1. It's available immediately, the social worker told her. We can have you moved in before your sons come home. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. That afternoon, when she visited the NICU, she was greeted with more good news. All 3 boys have reached the 5-pound mark, Dr. Patel announced, genuine delight in his voice. If they continue doing this well, they could be discharged early next week. Sarah stood between the 3 incubators, watching her tiny sons squirm and flex their miniature fingers. They were fighters, just like their mother. We have a home to go to, she whispered to them. It's not much, but it's ours. Later that evening, back at Melissa's apartment, Sarah was packing her few belongings when she noticed a discarded newspaper on the coffee table. Her heart froze when she saw the society page. Alexander Whitman smiling broadly at a charity gala, his arm around a willowy blonde identified as socialite Taylor Hampton. The caption read, Whitman Enterprises heir finds true love with Hampton media heiress at the Metropolitan Museum Spring Gala. The photo was dated just 4 weeks after he had thrown Sarah out of his life. 4 weeks since he had called her insignificant and her unborn children a problem. Sarah's hands trembled as she stared at Alex's smiling face. He looked happy, carefree, as if the destruction he had left in his wake meant nothing. That night, in the quiet darkness of Melissa's living room, Sarah made another promise to herself and her sons. She would not merely survive this. She would rise from it stronger than before. She would build something meaningful, something that would secure her children's future and perhaps, someday, show Alexander Whitman exactly what he had thrown away. While arranging her cleaning uniform for the night shift, Sarah couldn't imagine that in 15 years she would be standing on a stage receiving the Innovator of the Year award in educational technology, worth more than the entire Whitman empire. Sarah carefully folded her cleaning uniform and placed it beside the new second-hand laptop on her small kitchen table. After 2 weeks in the Queen's apartment, she had managed to create a semblance of home. The walls, once dingy and gray, now glowed with cheerful yellow paint, the cheapest she could find at the hardware store clearance section. The nursery, really just a corner of her bedroom, featured 3 cribs acquired through a church donation program. She had painted them white and added colorful mobiles crafted from paper and string. It wasn't the nursery she had once dreamed of when wearing Alex's engagement ring, but it was made with infinitely more love. "Almost ready for you," she whispered, running her hand along the edge of the nearest crib. According to the doctors, the triplets would be discharged in 3 days if they continued gaining weight at their current pace. Sarah moved to the window, gazing out at the brick wall of the adjacent building. The view was a far cry from Alex's Central Park panorama, but at least it was stable. The social worker had assured her that as long as she complied with the program requirements, she could stay for up to 2 years. Precious time to get on her feet. Her new routine was grueling. She woke at 4:30 each morning to prepare lesson plans, taught at Bronx Community High School from 8 to 3, then tutored struggling students until 5. On weekends, she cleaned office buildings in Midtown, moving invisibly through the spaces of the wealthy and powerful, emptying their trash and wiping their fingerprints from glass surfaces. Each day, she visited her sons in the hospital, marveling at their progress. Nathan, the smallest at birth, had become the most vocal. Benjamin, born second, watched everything with alert, thoughtful eyes. Christopher, the largest, already showed signs of the strong personality he would develop. Tonight, after placing her uniform by the door, Sarah opened her laptop, a refurbished model with a cracked corner but adequate processing power. While researching educational software for her students, she had identified a significant gap in the market. Existing programs treated all students the same, advancing them at identical paces regardless of their individual strengths and weaknesses. "That's not how learning works," Sarah murmured, typing notes in a document she'd titled Adaptive Learning Project. Drawing from her classroom experience, she outlined a system that would adjust in real time to student responses, providing more challenging material in areas of strength and additional support in areas of struggle. A knock at the door interrupted her work. Her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Gonzalez, stood in the hallway holding a covered dish. "I made too much arroz con pollo," she said, though they both knew it wasn't true. Mrs. Gonzalez, a widow who had raised 5 children in this same building, had taken Sarah under her wing. "You need to eat for those babies." "Thank you," Sarah said, accepting the warm dish with genuine gratitude. The kindness of strangers had become her unexpected support system, Mrs. Gonzalez with her food, the church ladies with baby clothes, fellow teachers with hand-me-down furniture. After dinner, Sarah returned to her laptop, working until her eyes burned. Her teaching experience had shown her that every child could learn if given the right tools. Her software would adapt not just to ability levels but to learning styles: visual, auditory, kinesthetic. It would transform education for students like hers, those who fell through the cracks of standardized approaches. The following week, Sarah brought her sons home. The tiny apartment immediately felt transformed by their presence. The air filled with the sounds of their breathing, their occasional cries, the subtle creaking of 3 cribs as 3 identical boys shifted in their sleep. "Welcome home, my loves," she whispered, standing in the dim light of their first night together. "It's just us now, but we're going to be extraordinary." The first months passed in a blur of sleepless nights, formula preparations, and diaper changes. Sarah took a 6-week maternity leave from teaching but continued developing her software idea during the rare moments when all 3 babies slept simultaneously. Mrs. Gonzalez proved invaluable, watching the infants when Sarah needed to shower or make essential trips to the grocery store. "My grandchildren are grown," she explained. "These little ones remind me of when my house was full of life." By the time the triplets were 4 months old, Sarah had established a system. She arranged her teaching schedule to maximize time with the boys, bringing work home rather than staying late at school. She found a home daycare provider who charged less for multiple children, allowing her to return to tutoring in the evenings. Each penny earned went toward necessities. Formula for 3 consumed most of her budget, followed by diapers and rent. Sarah cut her own hair, shopped exclusively at thrift stores, and learned to repair rather than replace. The only luxury she permitted herself was her laptop, the essential tool for her growing software project. One evening, as autumn leaves swirled outside her window, Sarah received a call that changed everything. "Sarah? It's Aunt Margaret," said a voice she hadn't heard in years. Her grandmother's sister, her only living relative besides her sons. "Aunt Margaret, is everything okay?" Sarah asked, bouncing Christopher on her knee while Nathan and Benjamin played on a blanket nearby. "I'm afraid not, dear. Your grandmother has passed away." The news wasn't entirely unexpected. Her grandmother had been in declining health for years. But it struck Sarah deeply. The woman who had raised her after her parents' death was gone, never having met her great-grandsons. "There's not much in terms of inheritance," Aunt Margaret continued. "The nursing home took most of it, but she left you her Cartier watch. She always said you should have it." 2 days later, a small package arrived containing the elegant timepiece. The vintage tank watch had been Sarah's grandfather's wedding gift to her grandmother in 1945. Its gold case and leather strap spoke of a different era, a time when her family had known better circumstances. Sarah placed it on her wrist, feeling the weight of its history. For days, she wore it everywhere, the last tangible connection to her family's past. But as she worked on her software project, an idea took root, a painful, practical consideration that wouldn't let go. One Saturday morning, with the triplets asleep after their feeding, Sarah researched the watch's value online. Similar models sold for between $6,000 and $8,000 at auction. A fortune to her, enough to register a business, purchase proper development software, perhaps even hire a part-time programmer to help realize her vision. The decision tormented her for weeks. Each time she looked at the watch, she saw her grandmother's gentle hands, heard her voice saying, "This will be yours someday, Sarah, a piece of our history." But when she looked at her sons, she saw their future, a future that could be transformed by the success of her idea. The watch represented the past. Her software could be their future. On a crisp December morning, Sarah dressed the boys in their warmest outfits, all donated from the church, and took them on the subway to the Diamond District. The high-end pawn shop was intimidating with its security guard and glass cases filled with glittering jewelry. "May I help you?" asked the appraiser, his eyes briefly registering surprise at the young woman with 3 identical infants in a triple stroller. Sarah carefully removed the watch from her wrist. "I'd like to know what this is worth." The man examined it carefully, checking the mechanism and serial number. "It's authentic. 1945 Cartier tank. Excellent condition. All original parts." He looked up at Sarah. $7,500. That's my offer." Sarah felt lightheaded. The amount was more than she earned in 3 months of teaching. She looked down at her sons, all 3 watching her with identical green eyes, their future versus her past. The choice, when framed that way, wasn't really a choice at all. "I accept," she said firmly. That afternoon, with a cashier's check safely deposited and a significant amount withdrawn in cash, Sarah purchased a new laptop with expanded memory and professional development software. She registered EdTech Revolution LLC with the state of New York, opening a separate business account with the remaining funds. Her tiny apartment transformed into a makeshift office. After the triplets went to sleep each night, Sarah worked until the early morning hours, teaching herself coding languages, developing algorithms, creating user interfaces. The learning curve was steep, but her determination was stronger. By the time Nathan, Benjamin, and Christopher celebrated their first birthday, with a simple cake in the apartment decorated with balloons from the dollar store, Sarah had developed a working prototype of her adaptive learning software. She tested it on her students, refining and adjusting based on their feedback. The triplets grew rapidly, developing distinct personalities despite their identical appearance. Nathan showed an early affinity for music, becoming transfixed whenever Sarah played classical recordings on her laptop. Benjamin exhibited remarkable focus, able to concentrate on single tasks for unusually long periods. Christopher was the physical one, reaching motor milestones first, always in motion. "You're all so different," Sarah would marvel, watching them play. 3 perfect variations on a theme. As spring arrived, Sarah received devastating news. Her tutoring service was cutting rates due to competition, reducing her already meager income. That same week, the daycare provider raised her fees. The financial equation that had barely balanced before now threatened to collapse entirely. Desperate for a solution, Sarah took on a third job, night shifts at a 24-hour diner on weekends. She would teach all week, tutor evenings, work the diner Friday and Saturday nights, and develop her software during any remaining hours. Sleep became a luxury she could rarely afford. One morning, after a particularly grueling weekend shift, Sarah nearly collapsed while feeding the boys their breakfast. The room spun, her vision narrowed, and she had to grip the table to remain upright. The episode terrified her. What would happen to her sons if she couldn't care for them? That night, in the quiet apartment with 3 sleeping toddlers, Sarah wrote a letter. If her software succeeded, it would be a testament to her journey. If it failed, it would at least be an explanation for her sons of why their mother had tried so desperately to build something from nothing. "My dearest Nathan, Benjamin, and Christopher," she wrote, her handwriting unsteady from exhaustion. "One day, I will return to Manhattan not as the broken woman who was thrown out, but as someone they cannot ignore. And you, my sons, will be living proof of the biggest mistake Alex Whitman ever made." She sealed the letter in an envelope and placed it in the small fireproof box where she kept their birth certificates and her business registration. Someday, when they were old enough to understand, she would share it with them. The promise that had driven her through these impossible years. With 3 one-year-olds sleeping in their cribs and a digital dream taking shape on her computer screen, Sarah couldn't imagine that her promise would be fulfilled in a manner more extraordinary than she had ever dared to dream. Sarah's letter remained in the fireproof box, but its promise echoed in her mind every morning as she rose before dawn to prepare for another day of balancing motherhood, teaching, and her fledgling business dream. 5 years had passed since that desperate night in the hospital when 3 tiny lives had entered the world, changing everything. The small Queen's apartment now bore the cheerful chaos of childhood. Educational posters covered walls once marred by water stains. 3 small beds had replaced the donated cribs, each with different colored sheets, blue for Nathan, green for Benjamin, yellow for Christopher, the only way visitors could tell the identical boys apart. "Mommy, look!" Christopher called from the living room floor where he was constructing an intricate tower from wooden blocks. At 5, his motor skills were remarkably advanced, his small hands confidently stacking pieces higher than seemed possible. "That's wonderful, sweetie," Sarah replied, simultaneously preparing lunchboxes with sandwiches cut into dinosaur shapes using a cookie cutter she'd found at a garage sale. "Nathan, please finish your breakfast. Benjamin, your book needs to go in your backpack." Nathan sat at the kitchen table, distracted by the classical music playing softly from Sarah's laptop. His eyes closed briefly, small fingers tapping in perfect rhythm to Bach's Brandenburg Concerto. Benjamin, meanwhile, had already dressed himself and was absorbed in a book about planets, one written for 3rd graders despite him only being in kindergarten. Sarah observed her sons with a mixture of pride and amazement. Their intelligence had become impossible to ignore, each boy displaying gifts that both delighted and sometimes concerned her. Their kindergarten teacher had already suggested testing for advanced placement. 5 more minutes, then we need to leave for school," Sarah announced, quickly checking her email before shutting down her laptop. 3 identical faces looked up at her, each bearing the unmistakable features of Alex Whitman, the same defined jawline, the same shaped eyes, though the vibrant green color came from her. Sometimes the resemblance caught her off guard, a phantom pain from a wound that had mostly healed. The morning routine proceeded with practiced efficiency. Sarah dropped the boys at their elementary school before heading to Bronx Community High School, where she still taught literature but now also supervised the computer lab 3 days a week. The additional responsibility came with a modest pay increase that helped cover the growing expenses of raising 3 active boys. In her classroom, Sarah had been quietly implementing elements of her software with her students. The results were remarkable. Students who had been falling between the cracks showed significant improvement when the learning materials adapted to their individual needs and preferences. "Ms. Mitchell?" Sarah looked up from her desk to see Dr. Liang, a visiting educational technology professor from NYU who had been observing classes throughout the district. "Yes, Dr. Liang," she replied, straightening papers on her desk during the lunch break. "I've been watching your implementation for the past week," he said, pulling up a chair. "The adaptive program you're using with your struggling readers. It's not commercial software, is it?" Sarah hesitated. "No, it's something I've been developing." "Developing?" His eyebrows rose. "You created this yourself?" "Yes," she admitted. "I've been working on it for about 5 years now." "Doctor," Liang leaned forward, eyes bright with interest. "It's remarkable. The way it adapts not just to proficiency levels but to learning styles, visual, auditory, kinesthetic. I haven't seen anything this sophisticated on the market." Sarah felt a flush of pride. "It's still in development. I test new features with my students, refine based on their responses. This could revolutionize individualized education," Dr. Liang said. "Have you presented it anywhere? Published your methodology?" Sarah laughed softly. "Between teaching full-time and raising triplet boys on my own, academic conferences haven't exactly been on my radar." Dr. Liang's expression shifted to determination. "There's an EdTech seminar at NYU next week. You should present this work." Sarah's immediate instinct was to refuse. The thought of standing before academics and technology experts terrified her. What if they dismissed her work? What if they saw her as just a teacher playing at being a developer? "I'm chairing the seminar," Dr. Liang interrupted. "Consider this an official invitation." That evening, after tucking the boys into bed, Sarah paced her small living room. The invitation represented an opportunity she had never expected, professional validation of her work, but the risks felt enormous. She had built EdTech Revolution from nothing, pouring every spare moment and dollar into its development. Exposing it to scrutiny could either launch it forward or crush it entirely. Sarah practiced her presentation in front of the bathroom mirror, then for the triplets, who applauded enthusiastically despite understanding little of what she explained. "Your algorithm sounds amazing, Mommy," Benjamin said seriously, adjusting his glasses, the only physical feature distinguishing him from his brothers. At 5, he already used words that astonished his teachers. The night before the seminar, Sarah's elderly neighbor Mrs. Gonzalez arrived to babysit. The boys adored her, especially the homemade cookies she always brought. Still, Sarah hesitated at the door, looking back at her sons. "They'll be fine," Mrs. Gonzalez assured her. "Go show those university people what a real educator can do." The NYU auditorium was intimidating, filled with academics in expensive clothing and technology entrepreneurs with cutting-edge devices. Sarah felt painfully out of place in her best teaching outfit, a modest navy suit purchased 3 years ago from a discount retailer now slightly worn at the cuffs. As she set up her presentation, Sarah noticed her hands trembling. The laptop she'd connect to the projector was new, her first major purchase after a small tax refund, but still budget compared to the sleek devices others carried. What was she doing here, among these people with their credentials and resources? Dr. Liang appeared beside her. "Nervous. Terrified," Sarah admitted. "Don't be. What you've created in your spare time outshines what entire development teams have produced with millions in funding." When Sarah took the stage, she initially spoke too quickly, her voice barely audible. But as she began demonstrating the software, showing how it adapted in real time to different learning patterns, her confidence grew. This was her world: education, learning, the delicate art of helping minds unfold. The key innovation isn't just adapting to whether a student is struggling, she explained more assuredly now. It's identifying how they learn best and adjusting presentation accordingly. A visual learner receives more graphics and diagrams. An auditory learner gets verbal explanations. A kinesthetic learner encounters interactive elements. The audience leaned forward, genuinely engaged. When she finished, the questions came rapidly. Technical inquiries about her algorithms, pedagogical discussions about her methodology, practical questions about implementation costs. Sarah answered each one knowledgeably, her years in the classroom providing insights that purely technical developers lacked. The theoretical foundation from her master's degree in education, combined with her self-taught programming skills, created a perspective uniquely her own. As people filed out after the session, a distinguished man in an impeccable suit approached. "Ms. Mitchell, Richard Harmon. I'm an angel investor focused on educational technology." Sarah shook his hand, trying to hide her surprise. "Nice to meet you. Your presentation was extraordinary. You've solved problems that major companies have been wrestling with for years." He handed her a business card. "I'd like to discuss investment opportunities, if you're interested." That night, Sarah could barely sleep. Richard Harmon wasn't just any investor. A quick internet search revealed he had funded several successful educational startups. His interest represented validation on a level she had never expected. Their meeting 3 days later at a midtown coffee shop was surreal. Sarah arrived directly from school, her teacher's tote bag stuffed with graded papers alongside her business proposal. "I've reviewed your materials," Richard said after preliminary pleasantries. "Your prototype is impressive, especially considering you developed it alone while teaching full-time and raising 3 children." "Thank you," Sarah replied, still not entirely believing this conversation was happening. "I'd like to offer you $50,000 for 15% equity in EdTech Revolution." Sarah nearly spilled her coffee. The amount was more money than she'd ever seen at once, more than her annual teaching salary. "That's substantial," she managed to say, professional mask firmly in place despite her internal shock. "It's actually conservative given your potential," Richard replied, "but it's enough to hire a part-time developer to accelerate your progress, maybe secure proper office space." That evening, at her kitchen table with the triplets asleep in their room, Sarah spread out documents and calculations. $50,000 would transform EdTech Revolution from a sideline project into a real business. She could hire help, develop a more sophisticated version, perhaps even begin marketing to schools. As she considered the possibilities, her gaze fell on the latest issue of Forbes magazine, which she had picked up at the library, part of her ongoing education in business. Alex Whitman's face stared back from the glossy cover, beside the headline, "Millionaire announces engagement to media heiress Taylor Hampton." Sarah's hand trembled slightly as she turned the magazine face down. 5 years had passed, but seeing his face still evoked a complex mixture of emotions: pain, anger, determination. He was moving forward with his perfect society match, probably never giving a thought to the 3 remarkable boys asleep in the next room. With renewed resolve, Sarah returned to the investment documents. This was her chance to build something meaningful, not just for herself, but for her sons. The validation from Richard Harmon confirmed what she had dared to hope. Her idea had real value. The next morning, Sarah signed the investment agreement, her signature transforming EdTech Revolution from a dream into a business with actual capital. As she handed the document to Richard, she felt a threshold being crossed, from struggling single mother to entrepreneur. While signing the document that would change her life, Sarah didn't know that in just 7 years her own photo would be on the cover of that same magazine, in an article titled "The Education Revolutionary: How a Single Mother Transformed Learning Technology." The signed investment agreement sat on Sarah's kitchen table like a talisman, promising possibilities she'd barely allowed herself to imagine. 3 years had transformed $50,000 into a fledgling company with 6 employees working from a modest office in Brooklyn's Dumbo district. The industrial space with exposed brick walls and large windows had been a calculated risk, more expensive than alternatives in less trendy neighborhoods. But its proximity to the Brooklyn Tech Corridor gave EdTech Revolution legitimacy it needed when pitching to schools and investors. Sarah stood in the center of the open office, watching her small team work. 2 developers huddled over code. A UX designer sketched wireframes on a tablet. A former teacher handled educational content, while a recent business school graduate managed operations. Once a week, a part-time accountant came to keep their finances in order. It was small but efficient, every person essential, every dollar stretched. "Sarah, the Chicago Public Schools want a demo next week," called Amir, her operations manager, holding up his phone. "They're considering pilots for underperforming schools in the South Side." Sarah nodded, making a mental note to prepare. Chicago would be their largest potential client yet, a validation of the years spent refining their adaptive learning platform. The software now did more than simply adjust to learning styles. It created personalized educational pathways based on continuous assessment, helping students who might otherwise fall through the cracks. The office door burst open as 3 8-year-old boys tumbled in, identical in appearance but distinct in energy. School had finished early for teacher development, and Mrs. Gonzalez had brought them straight to the office as arranged. "Mom, I got an A+ on my science project," Benjamin announced, waving a paper with a solar system diagram that far exceeded third-grade expectations. "That's wonderful, Ben," Sarah smiled, accepting his enthusiastic hug before turning to his brothers. "How was your day, guys?" Nathan settled quietly at the small keyboard they kept in the corner, fingers immediately finding a melody he'd been working on. At 8, he already showed remarkable musical aptitude, capable of reproducing songs after hearing them just once. Christopher headed straight for the 3D printer the developers used for prototypes, examining its mechanics with innate understanding. Sarah watched her sons with a mixture of pride and amazement. Their intelligence had become impossible to ignore, each displaying gifts that both delighted and sometimes concerned her. Their public school had already suggested specialized programs, but the associated costs remained prohibitive, even with her company's improving finances. "Sarah, you should see this," called Ravi, her lead developer. "Christopher just spotted a bug in the geometry module that we've been trying to track down for days." Sarah moved to the computer where her son was pointing at lines of code with confident certainty. "The variable needs to reset here," Christopher explained, pointing at the screen. "Otherwise, it carries the previous value into the next problem." The developers exchanged impressed glances. An 8-year-old spotting a coding error that had eluded professionals wasn't normal. None of this was normal. The triplets had been reading since age 3, solving complex puzzles at 4, and now demonstrated abilities that increasingly challenged even advanced educational materials. Later that evening, after the office closed, Sarah sat with her team discussing their upcoming presentation for an educational technology conference in San Francisco, their first national showcase opportunity. "The plane tickets alone will be $5,000, Amir pointed out, reviewing their tight budget. "Plus hotel, booth costs?" "We need to be there," Sarah insisted. "If Chicago goes well, we'll have the case study we need to attract more school districts. This conference is where decision-makers gather." The team nodded in agreement, though concern about expenses remained visible on their faces. EdTech Revolution operated on margins thin as paper, each investment decision weighed against immediate necessities. After the meeting, Sarah returned to their apartment, larger than the Queen's unit they'd left behind, but still modest for a family of 4. The boys worked on homework at the kitchen table while she prepared dinner, her mind calculating financial projections while her hands mechanically chopped vegetables. "Mom," Benjamin looked up from his advanced mathematics workbook. "Ms. Thompson says I should take the admission test for Horizon Academy." Sarah paused her chopping. Horizon Academy was one of New York's premier schools for gifted children, with annual tuition approaching $40,000 per child. "That's wonderful that she thinks you're ready for that," Sarah replied carefully. "Let's discuss it more after dinner." Later, with the boys asleep, Sarah researched Horizon Academy on her laptop. Their scholarship program covered at most 50% of tuition for exceptional cases. Even with EdTech Revolution's growth, affording tuition for 3 children at once remained impossible without significant sacrifices to the business. The following week brought the Chicago presentation. Sarah stood before the school district officials, demonstrating how their software had improved reading proficiency by 27% in pilot schools. "The key difference," she explained, clicking through data visualizations, "is that our system doesn't just identify that a student is struggling, it identifies why and adapts accordingly." The officials leaned forward, genuinely engaged. One woman, Dr. Lawson, the district's technology director, asked particularly insightful questions about implementation costs and teacher training requirements. After the presentation, Dr. Lawson approached Sarah directly. "Ms. Mitchell, your approach is unlike anything we've seen. Most educational software treats all students the same, just at different speeds. Yours actually changes instructional methods based on learning patterns." "That's exactly right," Sarah confirmed, "because students don't just learn at different rates, they learn in fundamentally different ways." "I'd like you to meet someone," Dr. Lawson said, gesturing toward a distinguished man who had observed from the back of the room. "Daniel Reynolds, CEO of Tesla's educational division." Sarah's heart skipped. Tesla had recently established an educational technology branch, bringing their innovation philosophy to learning platforms. Meeting their CEO hadn't been on her conference agenda. Daniel Reynolds approached with a confident stride. Tall, with prematurely silver hair at his temples contrasting against his relatively young face, he carried himself with the assurance of someone used to command but without the arrogance Sarah had often encountered in tech executives. "Ms. Mitchell," he extended his hand, "your presentation was remarkable. You've approached educational technology from an educator's perspective, not just a programmer's. That makes all the difference." "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds," Sarah replied, maintaining her professional demeanor despite her internal excitement at recognition from someone of his stature. "That's precisely our advantage. Our team includes educators who understand learning challenges firsthand. Please call me Daniel," he smiled. "I'd like to continue this conversation. Perhaps dinner? I have some thoughts about how your adaptive approach might scale globally with the right infrastructure." That evening, in a moderately upscale Chicago restaurant, Sarah and Daniel discussed educational philosophy with an intensity that surprised them both. His background included both engineering and educational policy, a combination that gave him unique perspective on her work. "The problem with most edtech companies," Daniel observed, cutting his steak, "is they're either founded by technologists who don't understand education or by educators who don't understand technology. You've bridged that gap." Sarah sipped her water, considering his assessment. "Necessity drove that integration. I couldn't afford to hire developers initially, so I taught myself coding. Couldn't hire educational theorists, so I applied my teaching experience directly. Sometimes constraints breed the most innovative solutions," Daniel replied, his eyes meeting hers with genuine interest that transcended professional curiosity. As dinner concluded, Daniel proposed a potential partnership. "Tesla's educational division has the infrastructure and distribution channels your software needs. Your approach has the pedagogical sophistication our platform lacks. There could be significant synergy." The suggestion left Sarah momentarily speechless. Partnership with Tesla would transform EdTech Revolution overnight, providing resources she couldn't otherwise access for years. "I'd need to discuss this with my team," she finally replied. "We've built this company from nothing. Maintaining our educational mission is non-negotiable." Daniel nodded respectfully. "I wouldn't want it any other way. Your mission is precisely what makes your company valuable." Back in New York, Sarah presented the Chicago trip outcomes to her team, both the potential district contract and Daniel's partnership suggestion. The excitement was palpable. These opportunities represented validation of their years of dedication. 2 weeks later, Sarah's phone rang with news that changed everything. Chicago Public Schools had approved a $3 million contract to implement EdTech Revolution's platform in 30 underperforming schools, the largest deal in the company's history. The office erupted in celebration when Sarah announced the news, her team hardly believing their modest startup had secured such a significant contract. "This changes everything," Amir said, staring at the contract figures. "We can hire more developers, expand the content team, maybe even get real office furniture." Sarah laughed, but her mind was already calculating more consequential possibilities. With this contract secured, they could finally afford proper salaries, health insurance for the team, and perhaps even tuition for the boys at Horizon Academy. That weekend, Sarah took the triplets to view a 3-bedroom apartment in a safer neighborhood. The building had doormen, elevators that worked consistently, and, most importantly to the boys, reliable high-speed internet. "Is this going to be our new home?" Nathan asked, peering out windows that offered views of the East River rather than brick walls. "I think it might be," Sarah replied, watching her sons explore the space with excited energy. After years of sacrifice, she could finally provide them with stability, safety, and room to grow. The following month brought whirlwind changes. EdTech Revolution moved to larger offices, doubled its development team, and hired education specialists to expand their curriculum offerings. Sarah brought on her first executive team members, a chief technology officer with public education experience, and a chief operating officer who had scaled other startups. On the day they moved into the new apartment, Sarah hung a single-framed document on her bedroom wall, the letter she had written to her sons in those desperate early days, promising to return to Manhattan triumphant. "What's that, Mom?" Benjamin asked, noticing it as he carried books to his new room. "Just a promise I made a long time ago," Sarah replied, "a reminder of how far we've come." That night, with the boys asleep in their own rooms for the first time, no more shared spaces necessary, Sarah stood on their small balcony looking toward Manhattan's glittering skyline. Somewhere in those twinkling lights was the penthouse where Alex had once tossed away her future like trash. She wondered if he ever thought about what he'd discarded so carelessly. Not just her, but the 3 remarkable children now thriving despite his rejection. While showing the boys their new and spacious apartment, Sarah didn't know that in less than 5 years she would be buying a duplex in the Upper West Side, just blocks away from the skyscraper where Alex had humiliated her. Sarah stood at the window of her Upper West Side apartment, the lights of Manhattan creating a glittering tapestry before her. 2 years had transformed EdTech Revolution from a promising startup into an educational technology powerhouse, with implementation in schools across 27 states and expansion into international markets. The software that had begun on a second-hand laptop in a Queens apartment was now revolutionizing education for millions of students. The morning sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a space that reflected both success and thoughtful restraint. Sarah had chosen this apartment for its location and practicality rather than ostentation. 3 bedrooms, an open living area, and most importantly, proximity to the specialized school the triplets now attended. "Mom, Nathan's hogging the bathroom again!" Christopher's voice echoed from the hallway, followed by the sound of rapid footsteps and a door slamming. Sarah smiled, glancing at her watch. At 10, the boys retained their identical appearance but had blossomed into individuals with distinct personalities and remarkable talents. Their acceptance into Horizon Academy for gifted children had been both a triumph and a financial stretch, even with partial scholarships and EdTech Revolution's growing success. 5 minutes, boys. The car will be here soon," she called, gathering papers for her morning video conference with international educators. Benjamin appeared first, meticulously dressed in his school uniform, glasses perched on his nose. At 10, He already carried himself with the serious demeanor of a scientist 3 times his age. "I finished my research project on sustainable energy," he announced, holding up a tablet displaying complex diagrams that would challenge many college students. "Ms. Peterson says I might qualify for the National Science Symposium." "That's wonderful, Ben," Sarah replied, straightening his tie. "Let me know when presentations are scheduled." Nathan emerged next, violin case in hand along with his backpack. His musical talent had flourished under proper tuition, his playing now drawing attention from youth orchestra directors across the city. Christopher followed, his athletic build already evident as he swung his backpack with casual confidence. His recent state chess championship trophy still held pride of place on the living room shelf. The morning routine unfolded with practiced efficiency. Breakfast, backpacks checked, lunches packed. As the boys headed to the elevator, Sarah paused at her desk to glance at her calendar. The international video conference would be followed by meetings with potential investors, curriculum development sessions, and finally, dinner with Daniel Reynolds. Daniel. The thought brought a small smile to her lips. What had begun as a professional connection had evolved into something more complex over the past 18 months. Their partnership had accelerated EdTech Revolution's growth dramatically, with Tesla's educational infrastructure providing global reach that would have taken years to develop independently. But their personal relationship had developed more cautiously. After her experience with Alex, Sarah had built emotional walls that proved difficult to dismantle. Daniel had been patient, understanding her hesitation, never pushing beyond her comfort. At the office, now occupying an entire floor in a commercial building in Manhattan's Silicon Alley, Sarah moved through her day with focused energy. 50 employees now filled the space that had once seemed cavernous for 6. Developers occupied one section, content creators another, with marketing, sales, and administration completing the ecosystem that powered their expanding reach. "The Tokyo implementation is exceeding expectations," reported Amir, now Chief Operating Officer, during their afternoon meeting. "Schools are reporting 23% improvement in English language acquisition using our adaptive methodology." Sarah nodded, pride warming her chest. "And Berlin?" "Similar results," Amir continued. "The localization team did an excellent job adapting the cultural contexts while maintaining the core learning algorithms." As the meeting concluded, Sarah's assistant appeared at the door. "The car is ready to take you to Horizon Academy. Benjamin's science competition starts in 45 minutes. Sarah thanked her, gathering her things quickly. No matter how demanding her schedule became, she never missed the boys' important events. It was a promise she had made to herself during those early years. Her children would always know they were her priority. The auditorium at Horizon Academy hummed with the energy of brilliant young minds and proud parents. Sarah slipped into a seat near the front, nodding to other parents she recognized. Many were executives, doctors, or academics, people who had always moved in circles of privilege. Few knew her background, the struggle that had preceded her current success. Benjamin stood confidently at his presentation station, explaining his research on micro-wind turbines that could be installed on urban buildings to generate sustainable energy. His articulation and understanding of complex principles drew impressed murmurs from the judges circling the room. "He's remarkable," came a familiar voice as Daniel slid into the seat beside her. "All 3 of them are." Sarah turned, surprised. "I thought you were in meetings all afternoon." "Rescheduled," Daniel replied simply. This seemed more important. The gesture touched her deeply. Daniel had never tried to replace the father figure absent in her sons' lives, but he had become a consistent, supportive presence. He attended their performances and competitions whenever possible, showed genuine interest in their developments, and treated each boy as an individual rather than part of a matched set. After the competition, where Benjamin received top honors, they celebrated with dinner at the boys' favorite restaurant. Sarah watched as Daniel engaged each of her sons in conversation about their interests, discussing box compositions with Nathan, debating chess strategies with Christopher, asking thoughtful questions about Benjamin's research. Later that evening, after the boys had gone to bed, Sarah and Daniel sat on her apartment terrace with glasses of wine, the city lights creating a private constellation around them. "I have something to ask you," Daniel said, his tone serious but gentle. "And I want you to know that you can say no without any impact on our professional relationship." Sarah felt a flutter of anticipation mixed with the familiar wariness that had become her emotional reflex. "I've respected your boundaries," he continued. "I understand why they exist, but I need to be clear about how I feel." He took her hand carefully. "You know that I'm not just your business partner, don't you?" The question hung in the air between them. Sarah looked at their joined hands, her mind racing through all the reasons to maintain distance, all the potential for pain. "I have 3 children," she finally said, "and many scars. I'm not a good emotional investment." Daniel's laugh was warm, without mockery. "You should know better than anyone the value of investing in what others underestimate." The simple truth of his statement disarmed her practiced defenses. For years, Sarah had poured herself into building a company based on recognizing overlooked potential. Yet she had applied the opposite principle to her heart, assuming its damaged state made it unworthy of investment. Before she could respond, her phone chimed with an email notification. Apologizing, she glanced at the screen and froze. "Sarah, what is it?" She turned the phone toward him. The email contained an advance copy of Time magazine featuring EdTech Revolution in its cover story, "The Silent Revolution in Education." "They're calling us the most significant educational innovation of the decade," she whispered, scanning the article. Daniel smiled, but his eyes remained on her face rather than the screen. "They're right, but that's not why I'm here." The contrast struck Sarah forcefully, between this moment of professional triumph in her elegant apartment and those desperate nights coding in a tiny queen's kitchen while 3 babies slept nearby. Between the dismissal she had once faced and the recognition now flowing toward her. Between Alex's cruel rejection and Daniel's patient presence. As if reading her thoughts, Daniel spoke softly. "Your success isn't surprising to anyone who knows you, Sarah. What's remarkable is that you've done it without losing your compassion, without compromising your values." The following week brought another milestone when Sarah received an invitation to be the keynote speaker at an educational technology conference at the Plaza Hotel, the very venue where she had once promised herself she would return triumphant. Standing in her office, Sarah stared at the invitation, memories washing over her. She had avoided luxury hotels for years, the associations too painful. Now she was being asked not just to enter such a space, but to command it, to be the featured voice that others would come to hear. A week before the conference, Sarah visited the plaza, telling herself it was merely to check the presentation facilities. As she walked through the opulent lobby, flashbacks of that rainy night threatened to overwhelm her. The humiliation, the fear, the uncertainty about her future and that of her unborn children. "Ms. Mitchell?" A young event coordinator approached. "Would you like to see the ballroom where you'll be speaking?" Sarah nodded, following her through familiar corridors. The plaza hadn't changed much in the intervening years. It was she who had transformed, metamorphosing from a desperate young woman into someone who now entered such spaces on her own terms. That evening, as Sarah helped the boys with homework, Nathan looked up suddenly. "Mom, why haven't you ever talked about our biological father?" The question, though long anticipated, still caught her unprepared. She had never lied to the boys about their parentage, but had answered their questions with age-appropriate information, never volunteering details about Alex's cruelty. "What made you think of that now?" she asked carefully. Nathan shrugged. "Joey at school was talking about his parents' divorce and how he sees his dad on weekends. It made me wonder why our dad never wanted to see us." Benjamin and Christopher stopped their activities, attention fully engaged. The 3 identical faces turned toward her, curiosity evident in their green eyes. Her eyes, in Alex's facial structure. Sarah took a deep breath. Your biological father made a choice when I told him I was pregnant. He chose not to be part of our lives. Because we weren't good enough? Benjamin asked, his directness characteristic. No, Sarah said firmly. His choice reflected his limitations, not yours. Never yours. Why hasn't he ever tried to meet us? Christopher wondered. Sarah considered her response carefully. I believe he continues to make choices based on what he thinks is valuable, and he's missed discovering 3 of the most valuable people I've ever known. That night, after the boys were asleep, Sarah found herself on her laptop, something she had resisted for years. She typed Alexander Whitman into the search engine. The results appeared instantly: business news, society pages, charity galas. A recent article announced Whitman Enterprises' expansion into Asian markets, featuring a photo of Alex looking older but still handsome in an expensively tailored suit. Another article mentioned his divorce from Taylor Hampton 2 years prior, followed by a new relationship with a European model. Sarah closed the laptop, a strange calm settling over her. The man who had once dominated her thoughts now seemed like a character from a book she'd read long ago. Recognizable, but no longer immediate, no longer powerful. The next morning, as she prepared for work, Sarah saw a notification on her phone. Whitman Enterprises faces 30% drop after failed investments. While preparing her presentation for the Plaza Hotel, Sarah didn't imagine that her triumphant return to Manhattan would be merely the prelude to an encounter that would forever change the dynamics between her and the man who had discarded her as insignificant. Sarah couldn't tear her eyes away from the notification on her phone. Whitman Enterprises faces 30% drop after failed investments. The headline shouldn't have mattered to her. Alex Whitman had been excised from her life 11 years ago, yet she found herself opening the article, scanning for details with unexpected interest. The business publication detailed a series of risky investments in European commercial properties that had backfired spectacularly, sending Whitman Enterprises' stock plummeting. A photo showed Alex leaving corporate headquarters, his expression tense, tie slightly askew, a far cry from the impeccably composed man who had once dismissed her so cruelly. "Mom, Benjamin broke the 3D printer again." Christopher's voice pulled Sarah from her thoughts. At 11 years old, the triplets' voices had deepened slightly, the first hint of the adolescence approaching on the horizon. Sarah closed the browser and set her phone aside. "I'm sure he was just experimenting," she called back, moving toward the boys' shared workspace in their Upper West Side apartment. Benjamin stood over the disassembled printer, his expression a mixture of curiosity and sheepishness. "I was trying to modify it to print with carbon fiber filament," he explained, already reassembling components with surprising dexterity. "That's the 3rd time this month," Sarah said, unable to muster genuine annoyance. Benjamin's technical curiosity had already led to 2 patent applications, remarkable achievements for someone not yet 12. 1 year later, the landscape of Sarah's life had transformed dramatically. EdTech Revolution's valuation had reached $2.1 billion after a successful Series C funding round. The company now occupied 3 floors in a gleaming office tower in Silicon Alley, with over 300 employees working to implement their adaptive learning platform in schools across 63 countries. In their spacious apartment, now adorned with art and comfortable furnishings that reflected success without ostentation, Sarah reviewed quarterly reports while the boys, now 12, worked on their individual projects. Nathan practiced a complex concerto, the notes from his violin floating through the apartment. Christopher analyzed chess strategies on his tablet, preparing for an international youth tournament. Benjamin sketched designs for an environmental monitoring device he hoped to prototype. "Mom?" Benjamin said suddenly, looking up from his work. "We want to ask you something." The seriousness in his tone caught Sarah's attention. She set aside her laptop. "What is it?" The 3 boys exchanged glances, that silent communication they'd shared since infancy, before Benjamin continued, clearly the designated spokesperson. "We've been researching Alex Whitman," he said directly. Sarah felt her chest tighten. Despite their occasional questions over the years, she had never shared the full story of Alex's rejection, wanting to protect them from feeling unwanted. "What have you found?" she asked carefully. "Everything," Nathan said quietly, setting down his violin. "News articles, social media posts, corporate records." "We know what he said to you," Christopher added, his expression unusually serious, "about us being common blood and a problem to be solved." Sarah's throat constricted. "How did you—" "We're good at research, Mom," Benjamin explained, "and we're old enough to know the truth." That evening, after the boys were asleep, Sarah sat on her balcony, a glass of wine untouched beside her. She had finally shared the complete story: Alex's cruel words, the ring thrown from the window, the security guards escorting her out in the rain. The boys had listened with expressions that shifted between shock, hurt, and finally, a quiet anger that troubled her. Her phone lit up with a text from Daniel. "Just checking in. How did it go with the boys?" Over the past year, their relationship had deepened into something Sarah had never expected to find again: trust, partnership, and eventually, love. Daniel had proposed 3 months earlier, offering not a diamond ring but a simple platinum band that symbolized continuity rather than possession. Sarah had accepted, though they had agreed to a long engagement, giving the boys time to adjust. "They know everything now," she typed back. "They found out most of it on their own." Daniel's response came quickly. "They're remarkable detectives. Are you okay?" Sarah considered the question. Was she okay? The memories still stung, but the pain had transformed from acute to chronic, a dull ache rather than a stabbing wound. "I think so," she replied. "It feels like closing a chapter." The following week brought a development that Sarah could never have anticipated. During a regular check of her business email, she discovered a message from the organizers of the Fortune 500 recognition event, an annual gathering of America's corporate elite. "Ms. Mitchell," the email read, "we are pleased to invite you as an honored guest to this year's Fortune 500 recognition event at the Plaza Hotel next month. Your company's groundbreaking work in educational technology has caught the attention of our selection committee." Sarah stared at the invitation, an uncomfortable premonition settling in her stomach. The Plaza Hotel again. The venue seemed to represent pivotal moments in her journey. But something else nagged at her consciousness. "Emily," she called to her assistant, who appeared instantly at her office door. "Who's hosting the Fortune 500 event this year?" Emily checked her tablet. "Whitman Enterprises," she replied. "They're the primary sponsor." Sarah felt a chill run through her body. Alex would certainly be there, not just attending but hosting. After 12 years of carefully constructed separation, their paths would intersect again. "I'll decline," Sarah decided aloud. "I have dinner with Daniel that evening." "Actually," Emily hesitated, "Daniel called earlier. He thinks you should attend together." She handed Sarah a note. "He said the merger announcement is scheduled for the following morning, and it would be strategically advantageous to make an appearance together at this event." The merger. In recent months, negotiations had progressed rapidly for Tesla's educational division to merge with EdTech Revolution, creating an unprecedented $7.3 billion educational technology powerhouse. The announcement would transform Sarah from successful entrepreneur to one of the wealthiest women in the country overnight. "Did he mention who's hosting?" Sarah asked. "Yes," Emily nodded. "He specifically said that shouldn't be a factor in your decision." Sarah tapped her fingers on her desk, considering the implications. After years of avoiding any connection to her past, perhaps it was time to face it directly, not for revenge or confrontation, but for closure. To stand in the same room as Alex Whitman, not as the desperate, heartbroken woman he had discarded, but as a business leader whose success had surpassed his own. "Can the boys come?" she asked suddenly. Emily checked the invitation. "It doesn't specify, but it says, 'and guests.' I'm sure it would be fine." A subtle smile formed on Sarah's lips. Perhaps this was the universe offering an opportunity, not for vengeance but for resolution, for her sons to see that their worth had never been determined by their father's rejection. Then we'll attend, she decided. All of us. That evening, Sarah discussed the invitation with Daniel over dinner in his penthouse apartment, a space that once would have intimidated her but now felt simply like an extension of the man she had grown to love. "Are you sure about bringing the boys?" Daniel asked, pouring her a glass of Cabernet. "It could be intense for them." "They need to see me face this," Sarah explained. "And honestly, they need to see him too, not as some mythical figure who rejected them, but as a flesh-and-blood person who made a terrible mistake." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "And are you ready to see him?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "I think I've been ready for years," she realized. "I just didn't know it." The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. The triplets excelled in their individual pursuits. Benjamin won the National Junior Science Symposium with his research on air quality monitoring. Nathan performed a solo with the Young People's Orchestra at Lincoln Center, and Christopher qualified for the National Junior Chess Championship. Sarah attended every event, pride swelling in her chest as she watched her sons flourish. Daniel joined whenever possible, his presence becoming a natural part of their family ecosystem. One evening, as they prepared dinner together, Nathan approached with an unusually hesitant expression. "Mom, about the Fortune 500 event," he began. "Will he, our biological father, will he know who we are?" Sarah set down the knife she'd been using to chop vegetables. "He'll know," she confirmed. "You three look very much like him, though you have my eyes." "Good," Nathan said with surprising firmness. "I want him to see what he threw away." The statement alarmed Sarah slightly. "This isn't about making him regret his choices," she cautioned. "It's about showing ourselves that his rejection never defined us." "Can't it be both?" Christopher asked from the doorway, where he and Benjamin had been listening. Sarah looked at her sons, no longer children but young men on the cusp of adolescence, their identical faces showing a maturity beyond their years. "I suppose it can," she acknowledged. "But the most important victory isn't making him feel bad. It's the fact that we're happy and successful without him." As the event approached, Sarah received another unexpected communication, the latest issue of Forbes magazine with her photo on the cover and the headline, "The Silicon Valley Visionary: How Sarah Mitchell Revolutionized Educational Technology." The article detailed EdTech revolution's rise from a small startup to a global force in education, with particular focus on the pending merger with Tesla's educational division. On the evening before the Fortune 500 event, Daniel arrived at their apartment carrying the magazine. "Seems like someone will be the talk of the party tomorrow," he said, handing it to Sarah with evident pride. "This timing feels almost orchestrated," Sarah remarked, examining the cover photo. Herself in a simple black blazer against a white background, expression confident and direct. "Just the universe's sense of poetry," Daniel suggested. "Perfect ammunition, though, if you need a confidence boost." Sarah placed the magazine in her briefcase. Something told her it might prove useful during tomorrow's encounter. As she stood in front of her closet later that night, selecting her outfit for the event, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the desperate young woman thrown out of a luxury tower to the entrepreneur on the verge of a historic merger, every step had been propelled by a combination of necessity, determination, and love for her children. The black Valentino dress she finally chose represented a subtle statement, elegant without being ostentatious, powerful without trying to prove anything. She had earned her place in these circles not through birth or marriage but through intelligence and perseverance. While choosing her dress for the Fortune 500 event, Sarah didn't imagine that her reunion with Alex Whitman would be just the beginning of a sequence of events that would transform not only her life, but his as well, in ways neither of them could predict. Sarah slipped the Forbes magazine into her designer handbag as a talisman of sorts, a physical reminder of how far she had come. Tonight would mark the culmination of a journey 12 years in the making, a return not as the heartbroken woman expelled from luxury, but as someone whose very name commanded respect in boardrooms worldwide. "Mom, are these cufflinks straight?" Benjamin adjusted his sleeves, the Armani tuxedo fitting his 12-year-old frame with surprising elegance. All three boys wore identical suits, though each had selected different accessories. Benjamin's sapphire cufflinks, Nathan's musical note tie pin, Christopher's chess piece pocket square, subtle declarations of individuality amid their matching appearances. "Perfect," Sarah assured him, her hands steady despite the anticipation coursing through her veins. Her own reflection in the full-length mirror revealed a woman transformed, the Vera Wang midnight blue gown accentuating her slender figure, the sapphire and diamond necklace from Daniel catching light with every breath. Gone was the department store dress, the desperate hope, the naive trust. In their place stood confidence forged through adversity. "You look beautiful," came Daniel's voice from the doorway. He entered the apartment with the quiet assurance that had first drawn her to him, his tuxedo impeccable, silver hair at his temples lending gravitas to his still youthful face. "As do you," Sarah smiled, accepting his gentle kiss on her cheek. Their relationship had evolved into something she never thought possible after Alex, a partnership of equals, built on mutual respect rather than dependency or power imbalance. "The car is waiting downstairs," Daniel informed them, handing Sarah a slim envelope. "And this just arrived by courier." Inside was the latest issue of Forbes with her cover prominently displayed, alongside a handwritten note. "Congratulations on changing the face of education. The world is watching. Elon." The Tesla founder's endorsement on the eve of their merger announcement felt like the universe confirming she had chosen the right path. Sarah placed the magazine in her clutch purse, another piece of armor for the evening ahead. "Are we ready?" she asked, looking at her assembled family, the three remarkable boys she had raised alone and the man who had entered their lives when they were already whole. "Ready," the triplets answered in unison, their excitement barely contained beneath the formal attire. The ride to the Plaza Hotel passed in thoughtful silence, Manhattan's lights creating a glittering backdrop to their journey. Sarah's mind flashed back to that rainy night 12 years ago, standing abandoned on the sidewalk, pregnant and terrified, staring up at a different luxury tower as her world collapsed. Now she was returning, not seeking admission to someone else's kingdom, but as royalty in her own right. "Remember," she said softly to her sons as the car approached the hotel, "tonight isn't about confrontation, it's about closure." "And maybe a little justice," Christopher added, a gleam in his eye that reminded Sarah so much of herself. The Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom had been transformed for the Fortune 500 recognition event. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables adorned with elaborate floral arrangements, while waitstaff circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The country's business elite mingled in groups, CEOs, investors, and industry leaders engaged in the delicate dance of power and influence that characterized such gatherings. In the center of it all stood Alex Whitman, commanding attention with practiced ease. At 45, he remained handsome, though fine lines around his eyes and a touch of gray at his temples hinted at the passage of time. His tuxedo, undoubtedly custom-made, fit his athletic frame perfectly as he raised a glass in a toast to fellow executives. "Whitman managed to gather everyone who matters," commented a banking executive to his colleague, unaware that Sarah could overhear as she waited with her family just outside the main entrance. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alex announced, his voice carrying through the ballroom as he approached the microphone, "when you see who I've specially invited tonight, you'll understand how far some of us have come and others haven't." The audience laughed politely, not grasping the targeted malice behind his words. Alex smiled with subtle cruelty, anticipating the moment when Sarah Mitchell, The insignificant teacher who had dared to think she belonged in his world would enter awkwardly, probably still teaching in the Bronx, perhaps with a troubled child in tow. The public humiliation would be his gift to her, a reminder that she should never have threatened a Whitman. The double doors to the ballroom opened. The buzz of conversation ceased instantaneously. Sarah Mitchell entered radiantly in her Vera Wang gown, flanked by three tall, identical young men in impeccable Armani tuxedos. Beside her walked Daniel Reynolds, whose face had recently graced the cover of Time magazine as the visionary who succeeded Elon Musk. He held her hand with confident, unassuming support. Alex's crystal tumbler trembled, spilling champagne onto his starched cuff. Sarah moved through the suddenly silent room with graceful confidence, acknowledging acquaintances with slight nods but maintaining her course directly toward Alex. The crowd parted before her like a sea, collective recognition dawning as they connected the woman before them with the magazine cover that had circulated through their social circles that very week. "Thank you for the invitation, Alex," Sarah said calmly, her voice carrying in the hushed room as she approached him at the center of the ballroom. "I presume you'd like to finally meet your sons?" The phrase, delivered in perfectly audible volume, created a ripple of shocked whispers followed by frantic silence. Photographers from the Wall Street Journal and New York Times, present to cover the corporate event, swiveled their cameras instantly toward the unfolding drama. "Sarah," Alex choked, his face alternating between deathly pale and flushed red. "I didn't. You can't." "Can't what?" Sarah asked, her tone polite yet unyielding. "Can't succeed without your help? Can't raise 3 extraordinary children without your support? Which impossibility have I committed, Alex?" The triplets observed their biological father with analytical curiosity, recognizing in his features the source of their own. Benjamin stepped forward, extending his hand formally as he'd been taught. "I'm Benjamin Mitchell," he introduced himself with poised confidence no 12-year-old should possess. "These are my brothers, Nathan and Christopher. Technically, I suppose we're the Whitman heirs you never met." Alex mechanically shook the offered hand, his brain struggling to process the situation. Triplets. He had 3 sons, 3 young men who were unmistakably his mirror image at 12. The same jawline, the same nose, the same arched eyebrows. Only the vibrant green eyes differed, clearly inherited from Sarah. "Mitchell, not Whitman," Christopher corrected with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Our mother gave us everything we needed." Daniel Reynolds stepped forward, discreetly producing the Forbes magazine. "I think we can say fate has a peculiar sense of humor. Wouldn't you agree, Alex?" The cover featuring Sarah struck like a visual slap. Alex swallowed hard as he read the headline and the estimated value of EdTech revolution, $4.2 billion. More than twice the current value of Whitman Enterprises after its recent stock plunges. You succeeded," he muttered, struggling to regain composure. "I achieved far more than you ever imagined I could," Sarah replied, her voice steady, "and I didn't need to step on anyone to get there." The guests surrounding them watched in fascinated horror as the drama unfolded. Theodore Whitman, the family patriarch, approached with his mahogany and ivory cane, his weathered face twisted in confusion and growing anger. "What's happening here, Alexander?" the elderly man demanded, cold eyes analyzing Sarah and the triplets with calculating precision. "Good evening, Mr. Whitman," Sarah greeted him with elegance she had never possessed at 27. "I believe we were never formally introduced. I'm Sarah Mitchell, the woman your son abandoned pregnant 12 years ago. And these are your grandsons whom you declared had common blood too diluted for the Whitman lineage." Theodore Whitman paled visibly, his eyes moving between the faces of the 3 adolescents, each one indisputably a Whitman, from bone structure to the set of their shoulders. "This is absurd," Alex attempted, partially recovering his voice. "She's inventing stories to—" "To what, Alex?" Sarah interrupted. "To ruin your reputation? You've done that yourself with 2 scandalous divorces and stocks falling 43% in the last quarter. The precise knowledge of his company's financial situation hit Alex like a physical blow. The woman before him was not the naive teacher he had discarded. She was an equal, no, a superior. In the business world he had considered exclusively his domain. "May I use the microphone for a moment?" Sarah asked politely, addressing the master of ceremonies. Before Alex could protest, she had taken the stage, illuminated by spotlights, 3 extraordinary young men and a billionaire CEO at her side. A complete family. Without him. When I was thrown out of this very hotel 12 years ago for not being sophisticated enough for the Whitman family, I promised myself that one day I would return, not for revenge, but to show my sons that our story would not be defined by rejection. The crowd was mesmerized. Cameras clicked incessantly. Sarah continued, her voice unwavering. "I sold my only valuable possession, a watch inherited from my grandmother, to found my startup in a small Queens apartment while teaching at 3 different schools and raising triplets alone. Today, EdTech revolution transforms education in 63 countries, and tomorrow we'll officially announce our merger with Tesla, creating the largest educational technology revolution in history." Daniel smiled, confirming the announcement with a nod. The implicit value of the merger, $7.3 billion, circulated in whispers throughout the ballroom. Alex stepped forward, attempting to interrupt the moment, but Benjamin positioned himself in his path. "We know exactly who you are and what you did," the young man said, his voice surprisingly mature. "But our mother taught us that your biggest mistake wasn't abandoning us, but underestimating her." Nathan added, "We learned that a person's true value isn't in their surname or bank account, but in the positive impact they create in the world." Christopher completed, "And that family isn't defined by DNA, but by who's present in the moments that matter." The public humiliation Alex had planned for Sarah transformed into his own real-time nightmare. Each word was live-streamed on Instagram by technology influencer Tech Truth to his 7 million followers. As they descended from the stage amid thunderous applause, Sarah paused briefly beside Alex. "I never needed your money or your name, Alex. I just needed you to get out of my way so I could soar." While Sarah and her family accepted congratulations from impressed executives, Alex stood frozen, champagne soaking his cuff, watching as the woman he had once called insignificant commanded the room that had been his to control. The 3 boys, his sons, moved with confidence through the crowd, their poise and intelligence evident to everyone they encountered. As the evening progressed, Sarah didn't imagine that this would not be the end of the story, but the beginning of an unexpected reconciliation that would test not only her forgiveness, but also her understanding of human nature. The thunderous applause still echoed in Sarah's ears as she navigated through the crowd, accepting congratulations with graceful nods while keeping her sons close. From the corner of her eye, she noticed Alex being cornered by his father. Theodore's face contorted with rage as he jabbed a finger into his son's chest. A small part of her, a part she wasn't entirely proud of, felt satisfaction at the sight. "Ms. Mitchell," a waiter approached discreetly, "Mr. Whitman requests your presence in the Cedar Room. He would like to speak privately." Sarah exchanged glances with Daniel, who raised an eyebrow in silent question. "We'll come with you," Benjamin stated firmly, not a request, but a declaration. His brothers nodded in agreement. "Of course," Sarah replied, placing a hand on Benjamin's shoulder. "This concerns all of us." The Cedar Room, a wood-paneled private space adjacent to the main ballroom, offered a hushed sanctuary from the gala's bustle. Alex paced near the fireplace, his composure visibly fractured. When the door opened, he turned sharply, his expression cycling through surprise, dismay, and something resembling resignation when he saw not just Sarah, but her entire family entering. "I had hoped we could speak alone," he said, his voice strained. "You gave up the right to private conversations with me 12 years ago," Sarah replied calmly. "Anything you have to say can be said in front of my sons and Daniel. The room crackled with tension as they arranged themselves. Sarah and Daniel on one sofa, the triplets perched on armchairs, Alex standing awkwardly before them like a defendant awaiting sentencing. "You really brought them here to publicly humiliate me?" Alex finally broke the silence, his tone accusatory despite his vulnerable position. Sarah met his gaze steadily. "No, Alex. They came because they had the right to know the man who rejected them before they were even born." "It wasn't that simple," Alex protested, running a hand through his expertly styled hair. "There were pressures you couldn't understand." "Family pressures?" Sarah interrupted. "Your father threatening to disown you? The Whitman legacy at stake?" Alex's surprise was evident. "How did you—" "We know everything," Benjamin stated flatly. "Financial records, board meeting minutes, even the prenuptial agreement you had drafted for Taylor Hampton 3 weeks before you threw Mom out." Alex blanched, sinking into a chair opposite them. "My father threatened to cut me off completely. The Whitman family has standards, traditions that stretch back generations. And I had 3 heartbeats inside me that depended on my choices," Sarah countered, her voice low but intense. "3 lives that became my entire world while you were busy protecting your inheritance." Benjamin leaned forward, his posture eerily reminiscent of his father's boardroom stance. "You offered money for our mother to solve the problem. The problem was me and my brothers." Alex winced at hearing his cruel words echoed back. "I was young, scared." "So was I," Sarah interjected. 27, alone, pregnant with triplets. The difference is I didn't have the luxury of running from consequences." Nathan, typically the quietest, spoke with unexpected intensity. "While you lived in penthouses, our mother cleaned office buildings at night to feed us. She sold her grandmother's watch, her only inheritance, to start her company," Christopher added, his usual chess player's calculation evident in his measured tone. "While you were attending galas with socialites, she was coding until dawn after putting us to bed." Alex's face registered genuine shock. I didn't know." "You never asked," Sarah replied simply. "You never once in 12 years tried to find out if your children had been born, if they were healthy, if they were even alive." "I sent checks," Alex protested weakly, "every month for the first year, which I returned unopened," Sarah confirmed. "We didn't need your money. We needed you to be a father." Alex stared at the 3 boys, his sons, taking in their features, the unmistakable Whitman characteristics blended with Sarah's coloring. "You're right," he finally admitted, his voice barely audible. "I was a coward." The admission hung in the air, unexpected and disarming. Sarah had prepared for defensiveness, for denial, perhaps even for threats, but not for this moment of apparent sincerity. "You didn't just lose an ex-fiancé that night," Christopher observed quietly. "You lost the chance to know your sons." Alex nodded slowly, his eyes moving between the 3 identical faces. "I see that now. I was young, arrogant, terrified." "I was young and terrified too," Sarah reminded him. "The difference is I didn't have the luxury of walking away." A knock at the door interrupted the tense conversation. Daniel's assistant entered discreetly, leaning to whisper in his ear. Daniel's expression shifted as he pulled out his phone, quickly scanning the screen. "The merger news has leaked," he announced, showing Sarah the headline appearing on financial news sites. "Tesla and EdTech Revolution. 7. $3 billion education deal finalized." The enormity of the figure seemed to physically impact Alex, who stared at the screen with dawning comprehension. Sarah Mitchell, the woman he had dismissed as a teacher with no future, now commanded a company valued at more than twice his family's empire. $7 billion? He whispered, the number seemingly impossible to process. 7.3, Daniel corrected with professional precision. The largest merger in educational technology history. The door burst open again, this time revealing Theodore Whitman, his face flushed with rage. "What is this merger nonsense?" he demanded, waving his phone. "How much?" Sarah rose, facing the elder Whitman with composed dignity. $7,300,000,000, Mr. Whitman, more than double the current market value of Whitman Enterprises. Theodore's gaze darted between Sarah and the triplets, calculation evident behind his initial shock. "These boys are Whitmans," he stated, as if making a corporate acquisition. "They carry our blood, regardless of the circumstances." "Mitchell," all three boys corrected simultaneously. "They're Mitchells," Sarah confirmed. "They've never needed the Whitman name or money." Alex remained seated, watching the interaction with an expression of dawning comprehension. "You said I would regret my choice until the last day of my life," he said quietly to Sarah. "You were right." Theodore's business instincts apparently overrode his previous disdain. "Perhaps we can discuss some arrangement," he suggested, his tone shifting to negotiation mode. "A recognition of paternity, appropriate shares in the family trust. We're not interested in being sudden additions to your dynasty," Benjamin stated firmly. "Our mother raised us to value achievement over inheritance," Nathan added. "And to judge people by their actions, not their bank accounts," Christopher concluded. Theodore's face hardened. "Alexander, handle this," he commanded, turning to leave. "And remember our discussion about the consequences of public embarrassment." As the door closed behind his father, Alex seemed to physically deflate, the carefully constructed facade of success crumbling. "He's threatening to remove me from the company," he admitted. "After tonight, he probably will." Sarah felt an unexpected pang of empathy. Despite everything, seeing Alex vulnerable triggered memories of the man she had once loved, before his cruelty revealed his true character. "Your father ruled by fear," she observed. "You had a choice in how you responded." "I made the wrong one," Alex acknowledged, looking directly at the triplets. "I can't undo the past 12 years, but I want you to know that seeing you tonight, seeing the remarkable young men you're becoming, makes me realize exactly what I threw away." Benjamin exchanged glances with his brothers before responding. "We don't need a father figure now. Daniel has been more of a father to us than biology could ever dictate." Daniel, who had remained supportively silent during much of the exchange, nodded slightly in acknowledgement. "But perhaps," Nathan added cautiously, "we might be willing to know who you are, not as our father, but as a person who shares our DNA." Alex's expression lightened slightly. "I would like that, very much." "It would be on our terms," Christopher stipulated. "No expectations, no sudden claims of paternal rights." "Of course," Alex agreed quickly. "Whatever terms you set." Sarah watched the exchange with mixed emotions. She had never imagined this scenario, her sons negotiating a potential relationship with the man who had abandoned them before birth. The reality was more complex than the clean victory she had sometimes envisioned during those dark early years. A notification on Daniel's phone drew their attention again. "The official press conference is scheduled for 9 tomorrow morning," he reminded Sarah. "We should probably leave soon to prepare." As they rose to depart, Alex stood awkwardly. "Sarah," he began, struggling to find words. "What you've built, it's extraordinary. Not just the company, but them." He gestured to the triplets. "I was wrong about everything." Sarah paused, the admission both validating and unexpectedly hollow. The acknowledgement she had once craved now seemed almost irrelevant compared to the life she had built. "Thank you for saying that," she replied simply. "But I didn't build EdTech Revolution to prove you wrong, Alex. I built it because it needed to exist, for students who learn differently, for educators who needed better tools. Your opinion stopped mattering to me years ago." As they left the Cedar Room, Sarah felt lighter somehow, as if a weight she hadn't fully acknowledged had finally lifted. The confrontation hadn't delivered the crushing victory a younger Sarah might have imagined, but something more valuable: freedom from the last emotional tethers to her past. While Sarah and her family exited, leaving Alex confronting his furious father, she didn't imagine that this wouldn't be the end of their story, but the beginning of an unexpected reconciliation that would test not only her forgiveness, but also her understanding of human nature. The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Sarah's Upper West Side apartment, casting long golden rectangles across the polished hardwood floors. Headlines about the $7.3 billion merger between EdTech Revolution and Tesla's educational division dominated every financial news outlet. But Sarah's attention was elsewhere, on the 3 identical breakfast plates she was preparing, a morning ritual unchanged despite her transformed circumstances. "The stock market response has been extraordinary," Daniel commented, scrolling through his tablet at the kitchen island. "EdTech Revolution shares up 32% in pre-market trading." Sarah nodded absently, arranging blueberries in a perfect circle around each plate's yogurt parfait. The confrontation with Alex the previous night had left her with unexpected emotional residue, not anger or vindication, but something more complex, a bittersweet sense of resolution. "Mom, did you sign my permission slip for the science expedition?" Benjamin appeared, already dressed in his school uniform despite it being Saturday. "We're leaving for the research station on Monday." Sarah smiled, reaching for her handbag. "Already signed and in my purse, ready for you." The doorbell chimed, an unusual occurrence on a Saturday morning. Daniel answered while Sarah continued breakfast preparations, her practiced efficiency uninterrupted. "It's for you," Daniel said, returning with a small package. "Special delivery." Sarah wiped her hands on a kitchen towel before accepting the elegantly wrapped box. No card, no note, just her name written in a hand she hadn't seen in 12 years but instantly recognized. Inside lay a velvet jewelry case, and within it, impossibly, the engagement ring Alex had thrown from his penthouse window that rainy night 12 years ago. A handwritten note accompanied it. "The security guard found this the night you left. He kept it for years hoping you'd return. I've had it in my safe since he retired. It belongs to you, not as a reminder of us, but as a symbol of your extraordinary journey. Alex." "Is that—" Daniel began, recognizing the significance of Sarah's shocked expression. "The original ring?" she confirmed, her voice barely above a whisper. "The one he threw out the window the night he told me I wasn't worthy of the Whitman name." The triplets gathered around, examining this artifact from their pre-birth history with scientific curiosity. "How did it survive the fall?" Christopher wondered, always the practical one. "It landed on an awning, apparently," Sarah explained, reading further in the note. "The odds seem impossible." "Like the odds of a single mother of triplets building a multi-billion-dollar company?" Daniel suggested with a gentle smile. Sarah closed the jewelry box decisively. "Exactly like that." The following weeks unfolded in a whirlwind of activity. The merger formalities required Sarah's presence at countless meetings, press conferences, and strategic planning sessions. The educational world buzzed with excitement about what the combined resources of EdTech Revolution and Tesla might accomplish: personalized learning platforms powered by sustainable energy technology, reaching the world's most underserved educational markets. Through it all, Sarah maintained her focus on her family's core priorities. When Nathan performed with the Youth Symphony, she sat in the front row. When Christopher competed in the National Chess Championship, she arranged merger discussions around his tournament schedule. When Benjamin presented his research at Columbia University's Young Scientists Symposium, she postponed a board meeting to attend. 3 weeks after the Plaza Hotel confrontation, Sarah's assistant forwarded 3 separate emails, one addressed to each of her sons, all from the same sender, Alexander Whitman. "He's writing to them directly," Sarah noted, showing Daniel the email notifications during their lunch meeting. "Are you comfortable with that?" Daniel asked, his concern evident. Sarah considered the question carefully. "They're old enough to make this decision themselves. I won't stand in the way if they want to know him, but I won't facilitate it either." That evening, She found Benjamin sitting on the terrace, staring at his tablet with unusual intensity. "He wrote to us," Benjamin said without preamble. "Separate emails, not a group message, each personally tailored." Sarah sat beside him, leaving comfortable space between them. "What did he say?" "He apologized, not just generically, but with specific acknowledgement of what he did wrong." Benjamin's analytical mind always sought patterns and motivations. He explained without excusing, no justifications, just accountability. "And how do you feel about that?" Sarah asked carefully. Benjamin looked up, his expression thoughtful. "Initially, I wanted to ignore it, but Nathan and Christopher think we should at least read what he has to say." He paused. "What do you think, Mom?" Sarah chose her words with care. "I think that 12 years ago I made a promise to raise you as men who make decisions based on information and empathy, not reaction and anger. Whatever you decide, I'll support you." Over dinner, the triplets discussed their responses with the serious consideration they applied to all meaningful decisions. "I'm not interested in a father figure," Christopher stated firmly. "We already have Daniel, but I am curious about the genetic and personality traits we might share." Nathan nodded. "The scientific aspects interest me too. Nature versus nurture." "We could meet him once," Benjamin suggested. "Set clear boundaries. Make it a fact-finding mission rather than a relationship initiation." Sarah listened to their mature deliberation with pride tinged with melancholy. At 12, they were discussing complex emotional terrain with more sophistication than many adults she knew. The boys collectively decided to respond with a single email, agreeing to a meeting under specific conditions, a public location, all three brothers present together, and Daniel invited as well, a clear statement that any potential relationship with Alex would not undermine their existing family structure. 2 days later, in a quiet corner of Central Park, the meeting took place. Sarah watched from a bench 50 yards away, close enough to intervene if needed, distant enough to grant independence. The sight of her 3 sons sitting across from their biological father created a surreal tableau, 4 faces with unmistakable shared features engaged in careful conversation. After an hour, the boys returned to where Sarah waited, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, satisfied, and mild disappointment. "He's not what I expected," Nathan admitted as they walked home. "More uncertain than he seems in public." "He asked a lot of questions about our interests," Benjamin added. "Seemed genuinely impressed by our accomplishments." "He wants to meet again," Christopher concluded. "We said we'd think about it." That evening, as Sarah prepared for her upcoming wedding to Daniel, a small ceremony planned for the following month, she found herself contemplating the ring Alex had returned. Its diamond caught the light, throwing prisms across her bedroom wall. Once, this ring had represented dreams of belonging to a world that had rejected her. Now it was merely an object, devoid of emotional power. "What will you do with it?" Daniel asked, finding her examining the ring. Sarah closed the jewelry box decisively. "I'm going to sell it and create a scholarship fund for single mothers pursuing education or entrepreneurship. Transform what was meant to bind me into something that liberates others." Daniel smiled, understanding the poetry in her decision. Perfect closure. The weeks leading up to the wedding brought unexpected correspondence, a formal letter from Theodore Whitman's attorneys. Sarah opened it with trepidation, expecting perhaps a lawsuit or demand regarding the triplets' potential inheritance claims. Instead, she found legal acknowledgement of the boys' bloodline and an invitation to discuss their inclusion in the Whitman family trust. "Interesting timing," Daniel observed as she showed him the letter. "After their stock dropped another 15% this quarter." Sarah set the letter aside. "The boys don't need Whitman money. They'll make their own fortunes, their own names." On the morning of their wedding day, Sarah helped the triplets adjust their formal attire. 3 young men in tailored suits who would serve as her attendants in the small ceremony at the conservatory garden in Central Park. "Mom, there's someone waiting downstairs," Christopher announced, returning from a last-minute errand. "Alex, he said he just wanted to offer congratulations, not intrude." Sarah paused, considering the implications. She had not invited Alex to the wedding. This boundary seemed important to maintain. Yet his appearance reflected either obliviousness to social norms or a genuine desire to acknowledge her happiness. "Tell him thank you. But today is about our family as it is now, not as it might have been," she decided. Christopher nodded, but before he could leave, Benjamin intervened. Maybe he could attend just the ceremony? Not the reception, just to see that you found the happiness you deserve. The suggestion surprised Sarah, coming from the son who had been most resistant to Alex's attempts at connection. "Why would you want that?" Benjamin's expression reflected maturity beyond his years. "Because it completes the story. He should see what he missed, not to make him suffer, but to understand that your journey led exactly where it was supposed to." After thoughtful consideration, Sarah nodded her agreement. This gesture wasn't about forgiveness or reconciliation, but about witnessing the completion of a circle. The ceremony was intimate and elegant, with only 30 guests in attendance. Sarah entered the garden on the arms of her 3 sons, a vision in a simple ivory sheath dress, her happiness evident in every step. Daniel waited beneath the wisteria-covered pergola, his expression reflecting the depth of his love and admiration. From the last row, Alex watched silently as Sarah joined her life to Daniel's, as the triplets beamed with genuine joy for their mother, as the family they had created without him celebrated their formal union. His presence went acknowledged but unremarked upon, exactly as Sarah had specified. As the small gathering moved toward the reception venue, Sarah noticed Alex preparing to depart as agreed. On impulse, she approached him. "Thank you for coming," she said simply. Alex nodded, an unexpected vulnerability in his expression. "You've built something remarkable, Sarah. Not just your company, your family." He hesitated. "I know the boys aren't interested in the Whitman name, and I respect that, but I hope they might someday allow me to know them better." "That will be their decision," Sarah replied. "They're remarkable judges of character." As Sarah walked toward the waiting car where Daniel and her sons stood, she felt the final weight of her past lifting completely. Her journey had come full circle, from desperate rejection to triumph on her own terms, from heartbreak to healing, from isolation to a family bound by choice rather than obligation. While Sarah walked down the aisle toward Daniel, with her 3 extraordinary sons as her attendants, she knew her life had completed a perfect circle. Not of revenge, but of triumph over adversity, proving that true power isn't in humiliating those who hurt us, but in flourishing so magnificently that our light illuminates even the darkest corners of our past. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.